Hello friends, my name is Behroz and welcome to the channel where I share with you tips and tricks that I read, learn and apply in order to become the best version of myself. Now in this video, I will reveal to you the most important part of the interview, which is least prepared. That is, any interviewee who is going to give an interview is almost unprepared for this part of the interview itself. So this video will have three parts. What is that important part of the interview? Why it is the most important part of the interview, and how to prepare and deliver with excellence that particular part of the interview. Now, killing the suspense, the most important part of the interview is where you introduce yourself. This part usually comes at the beginning of the interview, which is whenever you connect or sit in for the interview. More often than usual, the interviewer will first of all introduce themselves and then would ask you to introduce yourself. In the very rare case where the interview forgets to introduce themselves or ask you for an introduction, I would highly recommend that you ask them yourself, which is something in the following lines. Thanks for inviting me, or thanks for this connect. I appreciate your time. And before we dwell more into the interview and I answer your questions, it would be helpful if you can introduce yourself, and then I can also introduce myself. This way, politely, you can create a space to introduce yourself. However, it would be a very rare interview or a very rare instance where this part doesn't come up naturally by the interviewer himself. Now, let me talk about why this is the most important part of the interview. First and foremost, this part is not graded, and hence the interviewer has very low expectation from you, and therefore it is very easy to positively surprise them. Secondly, this is your chance to share all that is not on the resume. This could be your passion points. Let's say you have a side hustle, you have a startup, or you're learning something on the side, or you have particular passion for a certain sport or teaching, coaching, content creation, anything which you don't have on your resume written directly, you can talk about that passion points in your introduction. This is your chance to connect with the interviewer on a personal and an emotional level. Since later part of the interview will only have questions which would be very direct, non-emotional or straightforward. Given for most interviews, this part or this question comes in the beginning. Hence, it is this part which sets the tone and the stage for the rest of the interview. Another important point, it is this part of the interview where you can convince and tell the interviewer how much you are like the interviewer himself or herself, or the people in the organization for which you are being hired. Because note, people usually tend to hire or like people who they think are like them. This is a very natural bias which comes up in interviews, and it is very difficult to kill or ignore this bias. So it will be there somewhat, and hence it's best to make use of that bias, and hence to show the interviewer with that introduction how much you are like that particular individual or the other individuals who are in the organization. This may require for you to do some reading and understanding on that particular interviewer from their LinkedIn profile, most probably. Lastly, this is the only part of the interview where you are on the driving seat. You can take the interviewer wherever you want with regards to your life and achievements. Because after this, the interviewer will decide which part of your work and achievement they would like to discuss or interrogate more. And hence, after that, they will be on the driving seat and they will be deciding the course of the interview. Now make sure you don't give a rundown of your resume. A bad example here would be something like, I used to work for Procter & Gamble where I was into financial analysis, and then I joined Reckitt Benckiser where I worked on business transformation, and then I worked in Lego where I initially worked as a finance business partner for Canada, and then I moved to being finance business partner for e-commerce. These facts are boring and they're already listed on your resume. Now agreed, not all facts on your resume are read by the interviewer. However, let's agree, these facts are still boring, and stating them as is ultra boring. Now let's move on to the last section of the video where I talk about how to make a winning and lasting impression in this important part of your interview where you will introduce yourself. And hence it is very important that you are really prepared to answer this part. Now note, you need to make this part interesting, which is your introduction needs to be catchy and fun. As I mentioned before, the interviewer has zero expectation. Rather, they ask this question from you just as a formality. Now, for you to make anything interesting, make sure you tell a story and not state facts. Stories are catchy, they are fun to listen to, and you're able to connect with the person when you're telling a story versus just listing facts. Facts are what you already have in the resume. There is a list of things and those are all facts that are listed down. As I said, they're boring, they're not catchy, and they don't connect. And also towards the end of this video, I will share an example of how to deliver a story. I will give my own story, and if I was giving an interview, this is how I would be sharing my own introduction and telling that story. Now, one word of caution. Make sure you don't spend more than 5 minutes on this part, which is don't spend more than 5 minutes in introducing yourself. Otherwise, you will be eating time from the real questions that the interview wants to ask and inquire about you. Now, the story that you share in this part of the interview, which is your introduction, is all about you, which is you are the central character. Think about being a central or theme character of a story. How would you go about delivering it? Your story needs to cover your journey from the time you're born to the time you are here currently giving this interview. Also, see if you can make the story more emotional so you can connect with the interviewer on a personal level. This would primarily require you to talk about some adversity or some challenge that you came over. Now let me throw in some key ingredients of a great story. You can ask people to name their favorite movies, and all of these elements that I will list now will be there in that movie, just because that movie had a great story. In every great story, the protagonist is transformed in the end. He's coward at the beginning and brave in the end. Second, stories are made up of turns. A positive turn would put the protagonist closer to the achievement or their goal, and a negative turn moves the protagonist away from their goal. And you will be talking about all these turns in your story. The protagonist has to be going through pain and challenge and suffering. Next, the thing that the character wants is difficult to attain for the character. The more difficult, the better the story. So now here I share an example how I would cook up an interesting story. Also note, in this section I would recommend to do some exaggeration where required, just to make the story more and more catchy. So let me introduce myself. My name is Behroz. I'm originally from Pakistan. I was born and bred in a small city close to Afghanistan-Iran border. So after completing my schooling in my city, I was faced with the challenge of going for higher education in one of the top ranking universities in Pakistan in a bigger city. However, I could not afford paying for my education beyond the first semester. That is the only saving I had. Nevertheless, I took a risk, packed my bags and moved to Islamabad, where I got admission in one of the top ranking universities in Pakistan. After my first semester, I was lucky to get enough scholarship thanks to my good grades, so I could pay off my education for the first 3 years. However, despite the scholarship, I was not able to pay for both my university and lodging cost, and hence for my last year of university, I took a side job as an admin officer in XYZ company. So in the days I would have my classes in the mornings, I would be working in the evenings, and in the days I would have my classes in the evenings, I would be working in the mornings. So essentially I was almost working like 20 hours a day for that full year. Now the story that I've shared so far shares a challenge that was there, and I overcame that challenge. So I came out successful. Also, the story is a bit emotional, so I believe I would be able to connect with the interviewer on an emotional and personal level. Now let's continue with the story. Now after completing my MBA, I got a chance to work in the finance function of Procter & Gamble in Karachi. I worked in numerous sub-functions of finance such as financial analysis, logistics finance, corporate finance, and sales finance, and worked on some key projects like equity injection, devaluation recovery, 5-year growth plan, etc. So here in this part of the intro, I gave a quick touch to my resume as well, but again within the format of the story. So the idea is to still keep it interesting. So even when I'm sharing some facts, they are coming as part of the total story, the total picture, and hence they are interesting. And now I get back to the personal side of the story. So let's continue with my story. It is in Karachi that I got married. I met my wife at a friend's wedding. I have a saying that if you don't find your better half in the school, then you try at the workplace. If you don't find in the workplace, which I missed, so I missed both school and workplace, then the only option you're left with is crashing weddings. And this is what I did. I was at a friend's wedding. That's where I found my wife, and then we fell in love and we ended up getting married. Again, the idea here is to bring in some fun. So now note, I started with my personal side where I was born, my education, and then my work, then my wife, and now I will talk about my kids. And then with Procter & Gamble, I moved to Dubai, where I looked over the IMEA region, which is India, Middle East, Africa, and Pakistan. And I worked primarily in financial analysis for hair care business, and worked on key projects like Saudi logistics cost optimization, Middle East growth plan, India 5-year hair care growth strategy. And then it was in Dubai that we had our 2 kids, my son who is X years old now, and my daughter who is Y years old. After living in Dubai for around 7 years, we decided that we want to immigrate to Canada, and hence that was the turning point in my life where I resigned from Procter & Gamble, a very strong career that I had at that time, and I moved to Canada with my family. I started all over from scratch. Both me and my wife, we started entry-level jobs, and then we found our way up and up in 5 years that we stayed in Canada and eventually became citizens. Initially, it was hard to settle into Canada with all its weather and challenges. However, within a year's time, we assimilated very well with the Canadian way of living. The biggest part of that being is embracing the winters. So we enrolled ourselves into ice skating, skiing, and started to enjoy those 6 months of harsh and cold winters as well. And now we consider ourselves a complete Canadian as much as anyone would claim to be who has lived here all their life. So again, note, I'm moving from my birthplace to where I got my education, to my workplace, and then to Dubai. Then another challenge that came in my life where I resigned. I started from scratch, and how I got back to the level where I left originally in Procter & Gamble, and eventually came out successful by settling and assimilating in new way of living in Canada. So again, what I'm trying to do here is introduce myself in a story format, and hopefully by now the interviewer is all interested. In his mind, it's kind of a movie that is going on, and he can put some pictures to the story that I'm telling, and now he's very much interested to talk to me more, to know more about me, and I've already won 50% of the interview. Thank you guys, and hopefully this was helpful for you to now be more and more prepared with regards to this most important part of the interview, which is you introducing yourself. Thank you for watching.